All right, I'll call the meeting to order. Can we please have a roll call?
Ms. Moore is absent, right?
Here.
Lopez?
Here.
Sheridan?
Here.
Pollock?
Here.
Hale?
Here.
Okay, I'd like to remind everybody to please turn off their cell phones, pagers, or anything else that makes noise. Okay, first item is the approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
Have the changes that you addressed earlier in email been taken care of?
Yes, sir.
All right, hearing none, I'd like to call to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? A motion.
Aye, Darrell. Other brother Darrell.
Sorry.
Other brother Darrell.
Okay, this is the public comment section. Anybody would like to speak to the board on anything not on the agenda? Okay, we'll close the public comment section. Okay, the first item is ordinance number 1594. Do we have the applicant here?
There's no applicant.
The applicant is the city.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. All right. So, the staff then. Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. If it pleases the board, if we can do one presentation for both ordinances, you'll need to take two separate actions on each one. But if it's okay with the board, if I can do one presentation for both.
Okay.
Okay. There are two amendments, and the first one is going to be a comprehensive plan amendment, and it's going to be to the potable water element. The second one is going to be a land development code amendment to Article 15.6, wellfield protection. Both ordinances have similar language incorporated into them, and the comprehensive plan presentation, I'll be a little more detailed with the comprehensive plan presentation, and then with the land development code presentation, I'm going to just point out the differences between the two ordinances. So this is a request for the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board to recommend adoption of an amendment to the city's 2025 Comprehensive Plan Potable Water Element Policy 4-4.4.5 to provide protection of the quality and quantity of the city's potable water supply. Amendments brought forth in Ordinance 1594, the Comprehensive Plan Amendment, and its companion ordinance, number 1595, the Land Development Code Amendment, addresses changes to the city's wellfield protection policies and regulations. The amendments are intended to reduce the size of the wellfield protection radius, provide consistency with state requirements, and provide safeguards around the city's potable water wells. City staff, along with Yvonne Froscher, who is the city's environmental consultant, and the city attorney's office, met over a period of several months to bring forward the amendments that you're reviewing tonight. The existing comprehensive plan potable water element policy 4-4.4.5 requires a wellfield protection zone of 1,000 feet from each potable well with a permitted capacity equal to or exceeding 100,000 gallons per day. In addition to the 1,000-foot wellfield protection zones, there are two types of radius within the 1,000-foot wellfield protection zone. You have the 125-foot radius, which is the zone of exclusion, and it allows no development. You have the 200-foot radius, which is also the zone of exclusion and prohibits septic tanks, sanitary sewer facilities, or solid waste disposal facilities. Within 1,000 feet of a protected well field, the uses that are prohibited includes landfills, facilities for the bulk storage, handling or processing of materials on the Florida substance list, activities that require the storage, use, handling, production, or transportation of restricted substances, feedlots or other concentrated animal facilities, wastewater treatment plants, percolation ponds, septic tanks, and similar facilities, mines, excavation of waterways or drainage facilities which intersect the water table. With the changes to the comprehensive plan potable water element policy 4.4.4.5, the well field protection zone changed from 1,000-foot radius to a 500-foot radius. The prior 125-foot radius and the 200-foot radius zone of exclusion were deleted and replaced with a 75-foot radius zone of exclusion and a 100-foot radius secondary zone of protection. We have provided a map, which is attachment 1, that shows the distances around the different potable well supplies, and you'll see the hatched areas that shows the 75-foot zone, which is the primary zone of protection. And then you also have the 100-foot, which is the secondary zone of protection. And then you have the well field protection zone at 500 feet. And you can see what's shown within the radius from the potable well. Within the 75-foot radius primary zone of protection, the only uses that are allowed are those uses associated with water supply systems, open space and parks, playgrounds, playing courts, open air shelters, and other similar recreation facilities that are not hazardous waste generators and will not be served by a septic tank. Also, one residential dwelling per parcel, tract, or lot that may be entirely or partially within the primary protection zone, provided that the property will not contain a septic tank. Accessory structures, utility lines and roads, driveways, parking lots, piped water, stormwater conveyance, and irrigation systems associated with the permitted use. Within the 100-foot secondary zone of protection, sanitary hazards per Florida Administrative Code are prohibited. Within the 500-foot well field protection zone, prohibited uses include landfills, mines, egg production facilities, or commercial animal feeding operation, motor vehicle sales and service, chemical suppliers, and industrial uses. We also added a requirement that development must be served by city sewer utility services. Another added requirement is that a covenant shall be placed within a development order or development permit affirming the property's location in a designated well field, and the property owner shall be responsible for the disposal of household hazardous waste in an environmentally responsible manner. So that language will be placed in a development order. It could be a building permit, but that language will be placed there. The Development Review Committee considered the subject amendment at its September 11, 2014 public meeting, and thereat recommended adoption of ordinance number 1594. City Council will conduct the first reading and first public hearing on the subject amendment on October 6th. With ordinance number 1595, it's the same language as what's in the comprehensive plan. The only difference is that there were definitions added to Article 18, and these were developed from the state and federal definition guidelines. The definition clarified terms within the well field protection language. The DRC considered the same subject amendment on September 11, 2014, and thereat recommended adoption of Ordinance 1595. City Council will also consider the subject amendment on October 6th. It is recommended that the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board recommend adoption of Ordinance 1594 and of 1595. We do have the city's environmental consultant, Yvonne Froscher, here tonight with us to address any questions. And we also have Jennifer from our city attorney's office here to address any legal issues. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Anybody have any questions of staff?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wright?
I know I haven't been here a long time. You forgot my name, okay? So, a couple things. I've got some markups that, if you don't mind, I'd like to hand to Patty at the end, just some tech stuff. Question is that when I was looking at the two, not necessarily the staff report, but the actual ordinance, the way it was written, I did see some differences, and I had some questions on why. On 1595, it's probably easier to do it that way. Page 4, under section 4, specifically the special restrictions on development activities. Number C is written like the paragraph is completely different the way it's written than it is in 1594. It kind of says the same thing, but it reads differently. So I just wanted to make sure. I was trying to find out, maybe if we're trying to be consistent, maybe we ought to look at that. And then also on 1595, that same section 4 ends with subsection D, but in 1594 there is another section in these special restrictions that talks about the hazardous non-bulk commercial items, and that's not included in 1595. So the one I'm referring to would be in, or I'm sorry, back off for a second. Got my page in there.
You're on page 3 of 1595.
Yeah, I think
E,
that's,
where it talks about hazardous bulk, non-bulk commercial commodities.
yeah, it seemed to be that it wasn't in the same one, but maybe I'm wrong, but when I was going through it, it looked like the one was missing from one or the other.
It's in a different location on.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's on page 2 of 1595.
Yeah, I see
number
that
2.
there, number 2. Okay. It's just like, and on the one section, we write it under the special restrictions, but then we have special restrictions over here, and it's different, so. As long as it's in there, again, it was just a
We'll check again to
consistency
make
is what I was
sure.
looking for, so.
That's great.
The other thing was the maps. Looking at attachment 1, are these maps part of the development? I mean, will they go in as far as the?
Are they attached to the ordinance?
Yeah.
No, they're not
Okay,
attached to the
right.
ordinance.
Because the language is different on the maps than what's in the development orders. It says some things say, there's some different words in there that they've included, and then they omit some of the other special restrictions, some of the language. I marked it up. I'm going to hand that in. I think that was all I had.
Anybody else? I have a question. I guess it would be for the environmental. How is this consistent with the surrounding cities and areas? This well-filled protection areas? Oh, sorry.
Yvonne Froscher, environmental consultant. I'm a resident of Winter Springs. This is consistent with both the state Florida Administrative Code as far as protection zones. The 500-foot zone, it is consistent with Orange County, which Orange County, of course, has wells that are very similar to those here in Oviedo. They are all Floridan wells, high capacity. So yes, it is consistent with the area.
But it sounds like what you're saying is it's not consistent with other cities or with Seminole County.
It is not the same as Seminole County. Seminole County just quotes the Florida Administrative Code and does not talk about specific uses like the residential use within the 75-foot zone. They don't talk about the hazardous possibilities for the the 100-foot zone, the 200-foot zone. So there are some differences between this ordinance and some of the surrounding areas.
What about like Winter Springs and Castleberry? I mean, for them, do they have a 500-foot zone like
Yes.
this?
Yes.
Everybody else has a 500-foot
Yes,
zone?
I mean, that's pretty much imposed by the state
Okay,
for many uses.
okay, all right. That's all my questions. Anything else?
Yeah, why not? Mr. Chair,
Mr. Sheridan?
what's the reasoning behind dropping the 1,000-foot radius to 500 and the 200 to the 125 to 75 and the 200 to 100? What are we trying to accomplish with this?
The 500-foot zone has been imposed to be more consistent with the state protection zone, and it is consistent with the types of protection zones for these types of deep wells. There are places in South Florida that have different kinds of protection zones that are not just based on fixed radii. They get into doing assessments because they're shallow wells. They get into doing assessments for cones of influence, and that involves a lot of engineering input to define what those kinds of zones are. But this is consistent with the zones. The 500-foot zone is very consistent with the Florida Administrative Code.
Right. It's consistent, great, but why are we doing
And
it? What's
it's-
the purpose?
and-
There's got to be a purpose
And there
behind
is a
it.
reason for the 75-foot zone. We have property owners who have parcels within that zone, and they were very concerned about there not being any type of approved uses adjacent to the wells for those parcels. And so in order to accommodate some low-impact development, it was decided that a single-family residence would probably be a reasonable use and yet would not be a producer of a lot of hazardous material.
Chair,
Mr. Lopez?
with all due respect, you still haven't answered the question.
Okay,
The reason,
the-
the question is, why do we go from 1,000 feet to 500 feet? And you haven't answered that, other than saying the state. Why is Oviedo reducing its impact radius from 1,000 to 500? That's the question.
Mr. Lopez, I think I can help with that question. Ms. Frosher is correct. We were concerned, we did have property owners who asserted that because of the radius of the well field, which was 1,000 feet, there would not be any development allowed on the property. So we got the city attorney involved, and we developed language that would allow limited development. It is consistent with the state. We wanted to make sure we were still consistent with the state. We still provide an extra layer. It's an extra layer on top of what the state would require. So our regulations are still more stringent than the state, but in terms of the distance of the well field, we did reduce it so that it would allow some development that would not produce hazardous waste and would not jeopardize the city's wells. So that was the reason why we looked at reducing it from 1,000 to 500, so that we're still consistent. You have a number of developments, not just private residents, but you also have city property as well that's located within a well field. The new fire station, for instance, is located near one of the well fields. So we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a taking of property, and it was still consistent with the state. It still added an extra layer of protection around the city's potable well water supply, but it did allow for limited development within the areas.
So this is really about the firehouse building and not so much about everything else. Everything else falls in, but let's be realistic, and this is about the firehouse.
The first person who came to us was not the city. It was a resident who came to us about their property. And the property is located off of Clont Street. And there's a well. If you look at that, if you look at your property, if you look at your attachment, but I don't want you to think it's just about one or two property owners. It could be any one of the property owners. But if you look at the corner of Mitchell Hammock and Central, and you go up to Clont Street, and it's the first well that is located it's west of Central Avenue, and it's the first, you see the first well that's there? That's Clont Street, and there's a property that's there. And if you look at that parcel, the majority, when we calculated it, the 1,000-foot radius covered the entire property. Now with this, it still covers the entire property, but there's still limited development that can go there. And that was the first property owner that came to us about that.
Okay. Anybody else have any more questions?
Well, I mean, Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wright?
the only thing I noticed too is that by reducing them and staying consistent with code or administrative code or consistent with sister counties, we seem to have taken a lot of sites that were no longer compliant and pulled them out of, put them back in compliance. The 500-foot zone doesn't allow for maintenance of vehicles or sales, and I know that, on Mitchell Hammock we had that, which was an originally zone, and those reductions in the primary, I think they were zones of exclusion before, but, there was some residences that were probably in those too along Pond Street there, so it seems like we fixed that too. I don't think it's a negative that we've just factory reduced it, and if it does allow some of these other parcels a little bit more freedom to do what they need to do, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Shouldn't restrict somebody from being able to do the stuff when, if our codes greatly exceed maybe other areas too.
Also the reason we have some of the best
Mr.
water
Sheridan.
in the area.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I'd like to open it up to public comment. The end of public. I'll close public comment. What's the board's pleasure?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wright.
I guess we'll do these individually, but I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of ordinance number 1594, comprehensive plan amendment.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, Mr. Lopez. All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. Take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Nay. Okay, it was a 3-2 vote. Let the record show. Okay. All right. The second item is ordinance number 1595. We've already heard from staff, so I'll open it up again to public comment. And no public. We'll close it. What's the board's pleasure?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wright?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of ordinance number 1595, amendment to the Land Development Code.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. It's Mr. Wright and Mr. Lopez. All right. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
That's a 3-2 vote on that as well. Okay. All right, is there any, oh, okay, all right, these will go to the city council on the,
6th October.
oh, okay, on October 6th, at 7:30 PM, here in the, it's 7:30, right? Here in the City Hall. Oh, 6:30, sorry. All right, any discussion items? Anybody have any discussion items for tonight? Nothing? Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Lopez?
Second.
Mr. Wright seconded. All those in favor?
All right.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you all.